Good morning. Happy New Year. Hope your Christmas was good. As Graham said, my name's Eric. I am the senior pastor, head pastor, whatever you want to call here, Shoreline. I'm pretty excited. I'm excited. I think 2023 was awesome, and I'm looking forward to 2024. I also want to welcome online Pastor AG. He does the online moderating as pastor, but he's doing it from Buffalo, New York. You know, it's probably cold up there, so I'm glad that we're down here. Anyway, so as Graham said, we're finishing up this series called Heed the Call, and I'd like to start off by, some of you heard some of this, but just talk about my church experience growing up, because I really didn't grow up in church. I mean, I went to church. What was that? I went to church. I don't want to do that. I went to church some because that was the culture back then. You're talking the 60s, right? 70s. I mean, we did the Lord's Prayer in school every morning. We did, Our Father who art in heaven, along with the Pledge of Allegiance. So times were different back then. So you knew just enough about God to be even dumber about God, right? You know what I'm saying? So I went to church a little bit. My friends invited me to the Episcopal church here, and I went to that church some. And as a kid, I went to summer camp. My highlights of summer camp, we went over to Camp Beckwith over in Alabama, Foley, Alabama. And the first year, I came home with a puppy, because if you're going to get rid of puppies, leave them at a summer camp. So I came home with a puppy. And the next year, the highlight was dancing with this Filipino girl named Angie. And on the last night, they did a dance. We were in 7th grade. They did a dance. And I remember dancing with her to Stairway to Heaven, which was a long, slow dance, baby. So that was the dance you're going to dance to. Anybody dance to Stairway to Heaven? Yeah, I still do. We do right now. So anyway, I'm just kidding. My wife won't dance with me. She says I'll dance. I can dance near her, but not with her. So I do the Elaine thing, and she's like, just get away from me. But anyway, so I didn't really grow up in church. I went to church some, had some experience. And this is all about between 5th and 8th or 9th grade that all this happened. And I don't know where I got this from. This is kind of what it felt like to me. The whole church religious thing was like a game of Jesus Says. You've heard of Simon Says, right? Simon Says this. That's what it was like. To me, your relationship with God or the whole religion thing was Jesus Says. Jesus says, jump, you jump. Jesus says, go to church. Jesus says, pray. Jesus says, stop doing that. Jesus says, don't cuss. Jesus says, don't drink, right? And then just like Simon Says, when you got it wrong, you were out. And I got it wrong. The reason why I didn't go back to summer camp, because they asked me not to come back anymore. So, but the problem with being out was I kind of liked being out. It was a lot more fun, wasn't it? Being out, right? And maybe that's you. Maybe that's your relationship. You walked away from church, or your experience with the whole church thing was you can do this, but you can't do that, and stop doing this, and you got to stop doing that. And you're like, I'm not playing that game. So here's what I want to do for a moment. Because just imagine, what if you could just erase your whole memory bank of what you grew up learning about God and religion and the Bible and Jesus. Just, you don't know anything about Christianity. Your mind is a blank slate, right? And then someone were to hand you the first 4 books of the New Testament. And you don't know what those are called: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they're all accounts of Jesus' life written by 4 different people. So you have no preconceived ideas. Your mind is a blank slate. And you just go, I'm just going to read these 4 books. If you did that, if you read through those 4 things and you had no idea what this whole Christian thing was about, you would not come away with a religion or a system that is all about Jesus Says. You would actually discover, if you could go to it with fresh eyes, you would discover that Jesus was and is still extremely relational. In fact, you get into it's relationship on steroids. I mean, Jesus said one of the reasons he came was to say, he says, I came so that you would know what the Father was like. And so when you think about this whole thing and God and Jesus in regards to his connection with humanity, if you read it, it's very relational. In fact, Jesus used some terms. He might have used more, but I've got these 3 terms. He used some terms to explain what this relationship was about. One of the ways he said it was like a father-child relationship. He says, I've come here to show you the Father. If you read about this in the Old Testament, there's never reference to God being a father. So when he said that, I'm sure they're like, who's that? And Jesus is like, that's God. That's what we call him. He's our Father. Well, hold on now. My father was messed up. I don't have a good relationship with him. No. He's not a reflection of your earthly father. He is a picture of perfection as a father. So he talked about it as a father-child. Another expression he used was the term of about being a vine and a branch. He says, I'm the vine and you're the branch, okay? He says, I'm the vine and you're the branch. The vine doesn't say to the branch, hey, don't do that. Hey, you need to do this. You know what the vine says? The vine says to the branch, look, if you will abide in me, if you will connect to me, you will grow because I'm going to give you life. So it's very relational. Another term he used was the expression of between a shepherd and sheep. I think that's kind of a bad example. I'm going to be on his Netflix thing as well. No, sometimes we just don't relate to it because in this culture, this was huge. When he talked about it in terms of being a shepherd and a sheep, they understood. They understood that a shepherd cares for the sheep. Okay, they understood that the shepherd will even give his life for the sheep. In fact, Jesus says, you know what? In terms of relationship, he says, you know what? My sheep, when they hear my voice, they recognize me. How many moms you recognize your kids scream on a playground with 50 other kids? Because there's relationship there, right? He says, my sheep recognize my voice, okay? So it was intensely relational. Now, here's why I bring this up, especially on this last message of Heed the Call. You and I, we've been invited into an extraordinary relationship with a God who is extremely relational. And throughout the Gospels, a word that we see that expresses the beginning of this type of relationship is the word follow. Jesus came back to this word over and over and over. And it's amazing because he would extend this simple invitation to everybody he met, all kinds of people imaginable, from rich people to poor people, from sick people to healthy people, from religious to non-religious, spiritual, non-spiritual. It was a simple invitation that when you read these books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll see him extending this out to everybody. So as we finish this series called Heed the Call, we've been in it all year long, I believe that this word follow is a good expression of what it means to heed the call. Because we've had kind of our driving question this whole year in the series is, what does it mean to heed the call? And I believe that this word follow is a clear expression of what it means. And so what I would like to do right now is I want to look at a story, very familiar story. We've actually looked at it a lot as a church, just not lately. I want to look at it because I believe that it is the perfect story for us as we leave 2023 and we begin to embark into 2024. And I think it's a great story for us to look forward to 2024. Now, it's a very familiar story. If you love the Bible, if you read the Bible, you probably love this story. If you haven't read the Bible, you don't know the Bible, I think you'll like this story when we talk about it today. And I'm hoping that maybe you'll go back home and read it for yourself. Now, the story is found in the book of Matthew. And we're actually looking at when Matthew, because here's what I love about Matthew. Matthew writes the story of Jesus, but he also writes about how he encounters Jesus for the very first time. But he does it from third-person perspective. He doesn't go, and so I was doing this and I met Jesus. He talks about Matthew it's kind of like George Costanza. George is not happy now, when people talk in third. That's what he does when he talks about how he meets Jesus. So we're going to pick it up there, Matthew chapter 9. We're going to start at verse 9, and here's how it starts out. It says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. So this is Matthew talking about Jesus meeting himself. Now, why was he sitting at a tax collector's booth? Because he was a tax collector, right? So some of you already know this, but if you don't, you need to understand why this is so important, okay? And the only thing I can think of, I think that the only category that I can think of in our culture that would even come close to how unacceptable it was to be a tax collector. In our culture, I think it would be the drug dealer who sells fentanyl-laced drugs to kids, high school students, and young adults, okay? We would look at that person in culture and say, that is a vile, disgusting human being, right? I mean, there may be some other examples. You might not like that one, but that's what I could think of, right? But you get the picture. And the picture is, in this culture, you could not get any lower when it came to public acceptance than a tax collector. And that was because the tax collectors were Jewish citizens collecting taxes from other Jewish citizens for the occupying Roman Empire. And at the same time, they were skimming off the top for themselves, so they were making themselves rich at their fellow citizens' expenses. So they were seen as outcasts. They weren't allowed to go to the temple. They were seen as traitors, because they're benefiting themselves. And Matthew is one of these people. And so he is absolutely hated. So here's Jesus. He leaves another scenario. He's in Galilee, so this is probably a port because they collected taxes for everything. And they walk up, and there's Matthew. Now, Jesus could have said anything. I mean, I probably would have said, I bet your mom's proud of you, right? I mean, but he didn't do that. Now, remember, Jesus is still picking his 12. He hasn't picked all of his 12, so he's got some guys with him. And they approach Matthew sitting in a tax collector, and Jesus says, follow me. Can you imagine them? Like, excuse me, Jesus, did he just say for Matthew to follow him? You know, Peter's probably like, whoa, wait, Jesus, no. If he follows you and I'm following you, that means we're going to be following you together, okay? I mean, I like grace, but are you sure there's enough grace for this, right? Now, again, there were a lot of things that Jesus could have asked Matthew to do, but probably they would have been too hard. You know, Matthew would have said, I can't do that. It'll cost me too much. It's too difficult. And then Matthew tells us what happens next. So he sees Matthew and sitting at the collector's booth and says, follow me. And look what it says. And Matthew got up and followed him. So if you were one of Jesus' closest, you're hanging out with Jesus, you're one of his followers, you would be like, wait a minute, it can't be that simple, Jesus. It can't be that simple. In fact, there were religious people of the day shadowing Jesus. They were following around trying to figure out what this guy's about, right? And so they watch this interaction and they're like, it can't be that simple. You can't just have a guy, because this invitation wasn't like, hey, let's get together for coffee or let's walk and talk, you know? This was an invitation because Jesus was a rabbi. So this was an invitation of, look, I want you to be part of my circle, my inner group, my core, my cohort. You know, I want you to be a part of this. Now, what's interesting is not only what Jesus said, is what he didn't say. And that's why this message, we talked about this on Christmas Eve, the message of Jesus is for all people. Whether you're a Matthew in this room, maybe watching online, you feel like a Matthew, an outcast, or maybe you're a Jesus Says, you grew up doing Jesus Says. It's for everyone, because here's what Jesus didn't say. Jesus didn't say, if you're willing to fill in the blank, you can follow me. Oh, if you're willing to stop collecting taxes, you can follow. If you're willing to give up this lavish lifestyle, if you're willing to start doing some hard work, no, he just says, Matthew, follow me. And here's what's so cool. When you read this, or you read it, I challenge you to read it. Throughout the Gospels, this is the invitation that he extends to all kind of people. A simple invitation to just follow me. Now, here's the question that I want to introduce for today that I'm hoping we continue through 2024. And the question is not, what do I know? Or how much do I know? But the simple question would be, am I following? You know, not am I going to church? Not am I reading the Bible? Not am I praying enough? Not am I doing the things that I'm supposed to do? But am I following? What if we could take, again, all that Jesus says, approach to Christianity and everything that we think we know about the Bible that has kind of influenced us our whole life, and those preconceived notions about God, like, well, God helps those who help themselves, right? What if we just put all of that aside, and for the next year, we just ask this question: am I following Jesus? Am I following? It's so simple. And if it seems too simple for you, it seemed too simple for the religious people of the day. So, in fact, let me say something before we continue on with the story. So this is the time of year where we decide that we're going to do some things or maybe not do some things because we want to see something different in our life, right? This is the time of year, starting tomorrow or whatever, we're going to start eating right, or we're going to exercise more, or we're not going to watch college football anymore. This is the time that we start doing those things so that so what if instead of doing, resolutions, or what if this was our question? That we just asked ourselves every single day, every situation that we're in, am I following Jesus? And what if we actually did it? In other words, we just didn't ask the question and go yes or go no, but what if we actually decided to follow Jesus? In fact, you might be here this morning and you're not really a God person, and maybe you're what we call a seeker. Because if you're like me, I wanted to know if there was a God, I want to know him. I just wasn't sure if there was a God, so maybe that's you. Well, what if you spent the next year and just said, you know what, for this next year, I'm going to follow Jesus. No matter where you are in your relationship with God, if you're seeking, how awesome, you want to find the truth, then spend a year finding the truth. Spend a year following him to see if that the conclusion you come to is that Jesus is who he really says he is. That's what these guys did. Matthew, Mark, all of them, not Mark, but John, Peter, they followed Jesus to see if he was who he really said he was, right? And so why not do the same thing? Why not 2024? I'm going to follow God, and I'm going to find out who this Jesus really is. Now, maybe you're on the other side of the spectrum. You come from the Jesus Says background, or you've just been going to church a long time. Well, if you know you've been following Jesus a long time, you never arrive. Well, you do, but it's in a box, right? I just want to arrive. Okay, you're going tomorrow, right? No, you never arrive. You're constant. In other words, when you decide to follow God, you're going to constantly be challenged to follow in different areas at different levels. When you take that first step, it might be just to follow and read, read the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. But 20 years into it, following might mean something else. So what if every day in 2024, we just asked ourselves, am I following? And then when I ask myself, I'm honest. All right, let's get back to the story. So Matthew gives us a very interesting detail. It's like if you were watching a movie of this or a TV show called Chosen, you go, how did they get there from here? Because look what it says next. Verse 10, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, and you go, wait a minute, we were just at a tax collector's booth, and now we're at Matthew's house? And if Peter and the guys had a problem with Matthew following them, being in their group, following them around, I guarantee you they had a problem going to his house. It's bad enough that he's with us, but now we have to go to his house. And you know what? Jesus did this all the time. There was another story with another tax collector named Zacchaeus. Some of you might know the story where he was 5'2.5", okay? Couldn't see Jesus, but up in a tree. Jesus was walking down the street, says, hey, Zacchaeus, come down. Today we're going to your house. In other words, let's go somewhere where you're comfortable. Let's go somewhere where you're familiar. Let's go somewhere that there's a chance I might ruin my reputation, but I'll also gain a relationship, right? So let's see what happens at Matthew's house. So while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners, I love this statement, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Now, here's why I laugh. Tax collectors were so bad that they were offensive to even ordinary run-of-the-mill sinners, right? Like the guys in the balconies up here, all right? They were offensive just even to them. So you could be one of those ordinary, you're not a tax collector, but you're just a sinner, so you could be like, I may be a sinner, but I ain't no tax collector, okay? That was the Brooklyn one. I'm no sinner, but I'm no tax collector, right? But all of this group, okay, tax collectors and sinners, so if you were in just the ordinary sinning group, you weren't as bad as a tax collector, so you had a little bit of self-esteem, but you weren't good enough to go to temple. And so Jesus, here he is, and remember, Jesus is God in a bod, right? Jesus is God in a body. Can you imagine his self-esteem being, God, I'm just God in a body, right? Have you ever been with someone so comfortable with themselves that they make everybody else feel comfortable? You know what I'm saying? Well, here was Jesus, God in a bod, and he's surrounded by people who are nothing like him. He is in this house with the bottom of the rung of acceptance in this culture. And he's around people who are nothing like him, but he was comfortable with them. It'd be like, some of us walking into a biker bar and feeling comfortable, right? He was comfortable with them, and they were comfortable with him. This is a big deal, especially if you're not religious. Maybe you're actually anti-Christian, or you've got questions, or you're just not sure. Let me say this. Because we are the representation of Jesus on the earth, they call us the body of Christ, if you are with us, whether it's here on a Sunday morning or outside at Crab Island or wherever, if you are with us and you feel anything less than accepted and loved, it is not Jesus' fault. It's our bad. Okay? Because when you look at the life of Jesus, people who were nothing like him, they loved to be around him. They liked him, and they followed him everywhere he went. And if you were there 2,000 years ago, he would like you, and he would not be uncomfortable with you, even when he knows what you did last night or what you did last summer or what you're doing now. He knows this is very powerful. Even when he knows your inner thoughts, because he knows the hearts of men, he would still like you and be comfortable around you. So he says, He says, Matthew, follow me. They end up at Matthew's house. He's in there with sinners and tax collectors. Meanwhile, remember, he's being shadowed. Look at what happens in verse 11. When the Pharisees, these are the religious people, saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? So because they can't go in the house because it's full of sinners and tax collectors. They can't do that. So they're probably sitting outside, and maybe the disciples are going back and forth, getting food, whatever, DoorDash coming, whatever. And so they say, hey, look, we're confused because he's a rabbi, right? He's a holy man. We're holy men. He's a law keeper. We're law keepers. He worships God. We worship God. In fact, that's what we have in common. We worship the same God. But he doesn't invite us. Why doesn't he invite us? Why would he choose people like that? Why would he choose people who he's nothing like? And the people who are supposed to be like him, like us, he doesn't invite us. So they're like super confused, right? So they heard this. They asked the disciples. The disciples go in. And on hearing this, Jesus says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I laugh because you got to read between the lines here. Imagine you're sitting there, because I'll tell you what, that would not fly in our culture today. Imagine you're Matthew and Jesus at your house, and he goes, hey, I'm here for these guys, the sick ones. What? You're calling me sick? And that wouldn't happen. This is why this is important. Isn't it true that every one of us break our own rules? Isn't it true you break your own rules? Isn't it true the reason why you don't want to do New Year's resolutions because you'll have them broken by Thursday, right? We break our own rules, not just New Year's resolutions. We do it all the time. I'm never going to do this, or I'm going to start working out. I'm going to start eating better. We don't even keep the rules that we ask some of our family members to keep, right? So if you know there is a God, then you know you've probably broken his rules. If you know there's judgment, I do. If there's judgment, I'm in trouble. Or if there's a standard, if Jesus is a standard, I'm going to fall short. You don't need a preacher to tell you that. And see, here's what I think. Jesus was so comfortable with his own skin that he could say out loud in this room full of sinners, they're like, the disciples are going, hey, the Pharisees are outside. They want to know why you eat with all these guys. And Jesus is probably sitting there right here with Matthew go, hey, tell them that I'm in here with all these sick people because that's who I came for, was the sick people, right, Matthew? High five, right? Just like in the balcony when I call them out, they're like, yeah, we're the sinners, right? I used to go to Hog's Breath, and there would be religious preachers that would stand out front and go, you're going to hell. And we go, yeah, right? Let me tell you something. When men and women, young adults, teenagers, single, married, whatever it is, men and women, people who are willing to look in the mirror and go, you know what? I am sick. They're willing to look in the mirror and be honest and go, you know what? I'm missing something. You're right. My behavior, I can't control it. I do need something. People who are honest enough to look in the mirror and say that, they are prime candidates for becoming followers of Jesus. Now, Jesus probably could have offended them, but I think he just offended the Pharisees. And if he didn't, well, here's where he offends them. He says, tell them this, right, that they don't need a doctor, but the sick need a doctor. Verse 13, but go and learn what this means. And he was saying to the most educated people in their culture, go and learn this. And then he tells them, he reads them a passage of scripture. He tells them, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And he says it again, for I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners. And this was so offensive. Because here's what he was saying. He says, I am not simply content to surround myself with people who believe the right things and behave the right way. I've actually come to connect with people who believe the right things and behave the right way in order to call those who don't believe the right things and don't behave the right way, who are willing to admit that there's something more. There's got to be something more. There has to be something more to life. Now, if you are a Christian or a Christ follower, and especially if you go to Shoreline, this is part of what we're talking about this for the next year. Let me say something. We dare not, as a church, we dare not become a church that is simply content to gather with people who believe the right things and behave the right way. Because if we do, here's what will happen. One day we will find ourselves outside the very room that Jesus inhabits when he comes to call the sick and the sinners and those who need him. And I do not want to pastor a church like that. I do not want to pastor a church that is simply content to surround ourselves with people who believe the right way and behave the right way. And I don't want to attend a church like that. And I would never have my family attend a church that is simply content with surrounding themselves with people who believe the right things and behave the right way, and forgetting that we've been called to partner with our Savior to reach those who have a sneaking suspicion that everything is not right, that maybe there is something that I need. Maybe I am sick. Maybe there's something more to life. In fact, the message of the Pharisees, here was the message of the Pharisees: change and you can join us. If you'll change, you can join us, right? But Jesus comes along, turns it all upside down, messes everybody up. And listen, if this is all you hear, this is what Jesus says. Jesus says this: join us and you'll change. Join us and you'll change. Matthew, I'm not asking you to do anything except take a simple step, get up out of your tax collector's booth and follow me. And the Pharisees, they were incredulous. Wait, he's a tax collector. And Jesus says, no, see, that's not my game plan. That's your game plan. See, your game plan is make sure that everybody behaves the right way and believes the right things, and then we'll give them a quiz, and if they pass, you can join us. No, see, I don't care what you're doing with your life right now. It doesn't matter what you believe about me. It doesn't matter what you believe about me. What I'm doing is inviting you to take a simple step and follow me. But let me warn you, you follow long enough, one day you're going to look in the mirror and you're not going to recognize the person staring back at you. And it wasn't because you spent a lifetime of jumping through the Jesus says hoops. It's because in a relationship, people change. And that's what it is. It's not about Jesus says and do that, because I'm a father with a child. I'm the vine with the branch. I'm the good shepherd with the sheep. See, that is what heeding the call is all about. And it doesn't matter what spectrum you are on the line with God, whether you're a Matthew and getting up from the tax collector booth here on a Sunday morning, or whether you've been following God all your life. See, here's what will happen that if you decide to follow Jesus. See, when I've decided to follow Jesus, following Jesus forces me to focus on what I have rather than, forces me to focus on where I am rather than where you're not. Think about this. Following Jesus forces me to focus on where I am, not where you are or where you're not or where you fall short. See, if you're a Christian and you're not actively following Jesus, you know what? You are in danger of becoming a Pharisee. If you call yourself a Christian, but you don't actively follow Jesus, in other words, follow him through the Gospels, you are in danger of becoming a Pharisee. But when you wake up every single day and say, God, to the best of my ability, I am going to follow you. I am going to choose your way. What happens is I become aware of my responsibility. I become so aware of my responsibility that I don't judge you. Because I know that if in following, I could keep going. See, if you've ever felt judged by a church, or if you've ever felt, maybe kicked out of a church, it was probably because you were surrounded by a bunch of Christians that behaved right and they believed the right thing, but somewhere along the way, they quit following and they started judging. They quit following and started evaluating. Here's another way to put this, and I think this is in our app, so if you want to remember this or you can take a picture of it, here's another way to put it. The more conscious I am of the work God has yet to do in me, the less critical I am of what God has yet to do in you. See, the more conscious I become of what God has yet to do in me, I'm not going to be judging you for where I think you fall short. And I'll tell you what, when the body of Christ or a church who's firing on all cylinders gets this right, it is extraordinary. It is absolutely fantastic. When a group of people and it doesn't matter whether they know a little or they know a lot, or they've been walking with God a long time or walking with a short time, or they're people of great faith or little faith. It doesn't matter. But when everybody comes together and to the best of their ability, they're walking in the same direction to become followers of Jesus. I'll tell you what, when you find yourself in a community like that, whether it's a Bible study, a rooted group, or even a church, it is so powerful. So that's what it means to follow. Now, let me kind of backpedal to the New Year's thing, okay? So if that's our call, if that's our motto, am I going to follow? Am I following God? Instead of doing some New Year's resolutions, can I give you 3 steps, if you would, that you can take that would begin to follow Jesus in 2024? Three steps that would help you follow Jesus. The first one is what we call SOAP, all right? If you don't know what SOAP is, it's on our app. You get it every day. And as a church, we read together. We don't go to each other's house. There are some groups. I have a group on Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m., and we meet some men, and we have breakfast, and we read the chapter or 2 of the Bible. And then what it does is not only do we begin to understand the Bible and interpret the Bible, but we also learn how we can apply what we're reading in order to follow. And this is the most simplest step. If you're here and you're like, I'm going to take a step to follow Jesus, this is what I would recommend. The second one is a little deeper, and that is what we call the Deep Dive Bible Study. That's going to be happening starting, I believe, in the second week of January. You can sign up. You can stop at our connection. And it is going to be a little bit deeper. It's a deeper dive where, listen, we're going to be studying the book of Nehemiah, which is a great book about vision. But not only do you study the book and go deeper, it also teaches you actually how to study the Bible for yourself. And again, if you want to follow, that's how you follow Jesus. And the last one is this, Rooted. Rooted is a 10-week experience that will not only take you deeper in your own faith, but you will do it with other people, all right? And that will be a part of that connection because we're all part of that body. And to the best of our ability, if we're following God, we're going to see some powerful things. So let me leave you with the challenge for 2024. Are you ready? What if this year, every day, every situation, every decision we made, what if the question we ask is, am I following? And then we were honest with ourselves when we answered that question. Don't just answer it generally, hey, yes, I am, or no. Every area of your life, am I following God with my relationship with him? Am I following God with my relationship with others? Am I following in my finances or my health? In fact, I think an even more targeted way to put it would be this, and this is our challenge. Am I going to choose my way? I did it my way. Or am I going to choose God's way? Am I going to choose my way? Or am I going to choose God's way? When it comes to how I spend my money, am I going to choose my way or am I going to choose God's way? When it comes to how I treat people, am I going to choose my way or God's way? When it comes to how I respond to people in traffic or my sex life or my dating or my married life or my relationship with my kids, am I going to do it my way? Am I going to do it God's way? Can you imagine how simple that is? That is the simplicity of the message of Jesus. Follow me. Take that one simple step. Could you imagine? In fact, just imagine, if you would, right now. The beginning of 2024, and Jesus has his hand out. And he says, will you follow me? Could you imagine how different your life could be? Because it's not a major step, it's the little baby steps when we follow Jesus that in the year, you might not recognize who you are. All by simply choosing every day this year, or every time you're faced with it, simply by choosing, I'm going to choose God's way and not my way. I'm telling you, you will see a revolution. I wrote down, we sang that song. I thought it was so fitting because I didn't know we were going to sing it. It said, here's where I lay it down. You're all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. And that's so powerful. I'm not crying. You were crying. That's so powerful because can I just say this? When I write these messages, I got that finger pointing to me, and I have already God pointing out areas of my life going, are you going to follow this year? Just because I've been a Christian for 30-something years doesn't mean I've arrived. So I have those areas, but every one of us here can take a step. And it's all by choosing God's way. Where am I? This is my surrender. God, this is our surrender. Lord, 2023 has been amazing. We've seen people just lives changed. We've seen you reach so many people who are the Matthews of the world, and they feel accepted. They found a place. We've seen you do some amazing things in 2023. We never want to take that for granted, and we never want to not be grateful. But we stand on the threshold of 2024, and we believe that you can do so much more, especially with a group of people who are willing to say, God, not my will. God, not my way. I choose your way. So, Lord, this is our surrender. 2024, corporately as a church and individually in this room, we say, this is my surrender, God. Thank you for making it so simple. In Jesus' name, amen.
And with that, the 2023 season comes to an end. Good night.
I used to rule the world, seas would rise when I gave the word. Now in the morning I sleep alone, sweep the streets I used to own. I used to roll the dice, feel the fear in my enemy's eyes. Listen as the crowd would sing. Now the old king's dead, long live the king. 1 minute I held the key.
Dave Ellis? Dave Ellis? Dave Ellis?